Jimmy Lake is the new Falcons defensive coordinator, and he's going to elevate this secondary.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit fanduel.com/lockedon today to get started. So if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, Mr. Drew, Mr. Sirius Black, Mr. Quiet Storm, Mr. Grown and Sexy. And if you're wondering why, these dulcet tones are coming at you, we're coming at you live in an undisclosed location in Mobile, Alabama, prepping you for Senior Bowl week. And I'm recording this episode very late at night. So trying to keep it down for these thin walls in this undisclosed location. But we appreciate each and every one of you that are everydayers, that are up late at night or listening to this first thing in the morning as your first listen each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episodes as soon as it is available. So today's episode, we'll be talking about the coaching staff. We'll talk about the retention of 3 coaches on offense, TJ Yates, Michael Pitre, and Dwayne Ledford, and why Raheem Morris believes in the Arthur Smith run game. With those moves, we'll talk a little bit about the quarterbacks, that TJ Yates, now that he's moving to a new position, quarterbacks coach, may be coaching in the future here in Atlanta, talking about some of the Senior Bowl standouts that could be on the Falcons' radar this week in Mobile. But first, we got to talk about the big news of the day, which is the Falcons officially announcing the hiring of their 3 coordinators: offensive coordinator Zac Robinson, special teams coordinator Marquise Williams, and defensive coordinator Jimmy Lake. Now, if you listened to yesterday's episode, you heard me talk about Robinson and what he's bringing to the table on offense. Marquise Williams, we talked about his retention. But let's talk about Jimmy Lake. And Jimmy Lake and Raheem Morris go way back to their days in Tampa Bay together, right? When Raheem Morris was a DB's coach under John Gruden, guess who was his assistant? Jimmy Lake. When Raheem Morris was the head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, guess who was DB's coach? Jimmy Lake. Now, Jimmy Lake was also with Raheem Morris last year with the Rams as an assistant head coach. But between his time in Tampa Bay and Los Angeles with Raheem Morris, he was coaching at Washington, where he rose from a DB's coach in 2014 to their defensive coordinator in 2018 and to their head coach in 2020. Now, obviously, his stint as a head coach didn't work out particularly well. I think he coached only 13 games, partially due to the shortened COVID season in 2020. And then he wound up being fired before the end of the 2021 season due to a incident on the sideline where he shoved a player trying to break up a fight. And that led to a suspension and ultimate dismissal. Now, prior to that stint as the head coach, he was the DB's coach and defensive coordinator under Chris Peterson, very successful coach there at Washington. And during Jimmy Lake's time as that sort of defensive guru, Washington had a lot of great defenses and coached a lot of great defensive backs that went on to go from very good college players to very good NFL players. Players like Marcus Peters, Budda Baker, Kevin King, Sidney Jones, Byron Murphy, Taylor Rapp, Jordan Miller, a former Falcons draft pick, Trent McDuffie, Kyler Gordon, Elijah Molden, and Keith Taylor. So a lot of DBs came through Washington and got that Jimmy Lake bump. And we're hoping that Jimmy Lake can do the same thing to some of the DBs here in Atlanta. We already know that Jesse Bates and A.J. Terrell don't necessarily need a bump. Jesse Bates coming off an all-pro season. A.J. Terrell, one of the better cornerbacks in the NFL. But the other spots in that Falcons secondary, could use a bump, right? We've had a revolving door opposite A.J. Terrell for all 4 seasons he's been in the NFL, whether it was Darqueze Dennard, Fabian Moreau, Casey Hayward, Jeff Okudah, right? Didn't even finish the season with Jeff Okudah, with Clark Phillips taking over that spot opposite. Falcons are looking for stability. And if Jimmy Lake is a guy that can bring that sort of stability and coach up a player opposite AJ Terrell, we would love that. Safety position is another position that the Falcons could use some more help at. Richie Grant has not necessarily locked down that position. DeMarco Hellum stepped in late in the season, did a solid job, but I don't think you look at DeMarco Hellum's a 7th-round pick as a long-term solution opposite Jesse Bates. So could the Falcons bring in someone like a Taylor Rapp, who Jimmy Lake coached at Washington, who is a free agent? Raheem Morris also coached him in LA prior to him signing with Buffalo this past offseason. He's back to being a free agency. Jimmy Lake called Taylor Rapp one of the smartest players he's ever coached when Taylor Rapp was coming up through Washington into the NFL draft several years ago. Not to say Richie Grant is not smart, but biting on as many double moves as he did was not necessarily the smartest play. So could the Falcons be looking at a player like Taylor Rapp or a Jordan Fuller, who Raheem Morris coached these last few years with the Rams, to upgrade that position and sort of elevate that safety position? Now you ask, okay, we know Jimmy Lake can coach DBs. Can he coordinate a defense? Can he call plays on defense? Time will tell. But in terms of what the scheme that Jimmy Lake is going to bring here, I think it's a pretty safe assumption that you will see a somewhat continuation, some tweaking to what we did under Ryan Nielsen, because the Falcons are likely to employ that sort of Fangio, Staley style of defense that Raheem Morris deployed in LA. A lot of split safety looks, 2 high looks, cover 4, cover 6. One of the things the Rams did, just like the Falcons did this past year, a lot of 3 safety looks. So even if Richie Grant isn't starting opposite Jesse Bates, he may get an opportunity as that dime safety, as that third safety in that look. Could we see Caden Ellis used as a blitzer in the same ways he was here in Atlanta under Ryan Nielsen, same ways that Ernest Jones was used as a blitzer this past year for the Rams? So I don't think this defense is going to be schematically drastically different from what we've seen this past year. And so that's going to allow Jimmy Lake and Raheem Morris to build upon what Ryan Nielsen did, because they're not going to go back to the drawing board from a schematic standpoint. It's just about elevating, right? Elevating the secondary, elevating the pass rush, elevating the linebacker play. So that's what Raheem Morris and company are going to really try to build here in Atlanta. And we'll see if Jimmy Lake is the guy that can do that as a first-time NFL defensive coordinator, very successful college defensive coordinator. All right. But can he do it as a first-time NFL defensive coordinator? And it's the same question we had yesterday with Zac Robinson, first-time NFL play caller as an offensive coordinator here in Atlanta. But there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about these 2 hires, right? We've seen that Sean McVay pipeline really develop coaches the last 6-7 years in LA and export those guys. Zach Taylor, Kevin O'Connell, Raheem Morris now. Same thing we're hoping to develop here in Atlanta. I know we want to keep these guys for a decade or more, but if these guys are getting calls in a year or 2, for being head coaches, Zac Robinson, Jimmy Lake, right? That's a good thing. That means that the Falcons are getting results on the field. So we're hoping that we can have a pipeline under Raheem Morris, right, from a coaching standpoint, just like Sean McVay has had in LA. That's a sign of success here in Atlanta. So that is something to wish for. Now, obviously, when those calls come, you hope that maybe the Falcons can hang up those calls, but you want those calls is basically the point I'm trying to make. So we'll see if that is the case for Jimmy Lake as well as Zac Robinson and Marquise Williams in the future. But we'll talk more about some of the coaches on the offensive side of the ball that Raheem Morris is bringing to the table. We're talking about elevating, right? Raheem Morris is basically saying, hey, we love the run game that Arthur Smith needs to do. We don't need to elevate that. That's good to go. But we're going to try to elevate this passing game, and we'll break that down when we get into why the Falcons are retaining TJ Yates, Michael Pitre, and Dwayne Ledford to continue today's Locked On Falcons. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And if you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring, whether you're scoring the best seat on the couch, the best snack, the best drink, or placing some super bets, and you can score big with FanDuel with some of their Super Bowl props, right? If you want to go any offensive lineman to score a touchdown, you want to bet on Colton McKivitz to get in the end zone, those odds are 85 to 1. That means, right, you can, for the price of a 6-pack or what the price of a six pack used to be before inflation hit. $6, you throw $6 on that prop bet for any offensive line to score a touchdown, you can win over $500. You can buy all the six packs you can need for future Super Bowl Sundays. And FanDuel is helping you get that win if you win that prop bet. There's so many ways to bet prop bets. Who's going to score touchdowns? Who's going to score the most points? New customers can join today and get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. So just head on over to fanduel.com/locked-on to sign up fast. Fanduel.com/locked-on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So continuing today's Locked On Falcons, I want to plug the Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Sports Atlanta 24/7 streaming channels right here on YouTube, the first of their kind. Locked On Sports Today is giving you the biggest stories around the globe. Locked On Sports Atlanta is giving you the biggest stories right here in your area in Georgia, covering all of Atlanta and Georgia sports. Check them out. Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day right here on YouTube. So talking about the Falcons coaching staff, they are retaining 3 coaches. Hasn't been officially announced as of this recording, but we have pretty good reports from people like Zach Klein and James Palmer of NFL Network, Zach Klein of WSB TV right here in Atlanta, that the Falcons are retaining 3 coaches, Dwayne Ledford, TJ Yates, and Michael Pitre, right? And James Palmer is reporting that TJ Yates going from wide receivers coach under Arthur Smith these last couple of years to quarterbacks coach. Now, Dwayne Ledford's the offensive line coach. Michael Pitre is the running backs coach, and their retentions is basically Raheem Morris saying, and Zac Robinson coming in here and saying, we don't want to necessarily mess up a good thing, which is this Falcons run game. We talked yesterday about the offensive line after, a dominant year in 2022, leading the Falcons to have one of the best run games in the NFL. Took a step back this year, and the run game disappointed. But there's every reason to believe that this offensive line, this run game is going to rebound with Dwayne Ledford, with Pitre, saying that continuity. You've seen the work that Pitre has done with Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier the last 2 years. You've seen the work that Dwayne Ledford has done the past 2 years. And even if, that Dwayne Ledford stock that we've been stockpiling over the last 2 years, isn't as illustrious as it seemed to be a year ago, there's every reason to believe that that unit is going to rebound with the continuity of keeping Dwayne Ledford one of the best wide zone, outside zone teachers in the NFL. That means that the Falcons are probably going to stick with that outside zone, wide zone that we talked about possibly changing under Zac Robinson due to the Rams moving away from that type of scheme to more of an inside gap sort of run scheme. But with Ledford sticking around, you can bet that they're not going to change that run game. They're going to rely on that run game. And so you're likely to see all 5 starters, Jake Matthews, Matthew Bergeron, Drew Dolman, Caleb McGarry, and Chris Lindstrom, return in their roles on that Falcons front. And that continuity that they had starting the vast majority of this season, they can build upon that. And that's a reason to believe that this run game, despite it disappointing, despite it not living up to the expectations, all the thing we talked about on yesterday's episode, we talked a number of times, right? You can argue that the biggest bet that the Falcons made this year, right, not at FanDuel, right, they didn't win that bet like you can at FanDuel.com/locked-on, but the biggest bet the Falcons made was the bet on the run game to carry their offense, which has led to their bets on Desmond Ridder that also did not necessarily come true. And, Raheem Morris and company, I think, are making a similar bet, but I don't think it's a bad bet. Just like I don't think it was a bad bet with Arthur Smith. You just didn't get the results, and we're hoping that Zac Robinson, Dwayne Ledford, Michael Pitre are going to get those results. Now, the Falcons are seemingly telling us by only retaining TJ Yates so far, we'll see what else happens, is that the Falcons believe, the new regime believes that they can elevate this passing attack. And they're moving TJ Yates, I think, to a better role for him, quarterbacks coach rather than wide receivers coach. I didn't really love the wide receiver development this past year. One of the things I constantly complained about on all 22 reviews and extended all 22 reviews for the Locked On Falcons insiders was, why don't we ever adjust hot routes to some of these young wide receivers, right? When a blitz is coming, no one's adjusting their routes to get into their breaks in and out quicker so the quarterback can get rid of the ball quicker. You didn't see those adjustments, those recognitions. Not blaming that on TJ Yates, but it's just something that, again, they weren't necessarily coaching those guys up to do. And again, TJ Yates knows the quarterback position. He's been a quarterback in this league. He's coached quarterbacks. He was coaching that Browns quarterback formerly in Houston, was an assistant quarterbacks coach when that Browns quarterback had his breakout year as the Texans quarterback in 2020. that led to so many teams, including the Atlanta Falcons, coveting him before he went to the Cleveland Browns. So I think this is a better role for TJ Yates, and I think he can certainly teach what Zac Robinson is preaching. And, we'll see if he can teach some of these young players that I may be watching this week at the Senior Bowl, right? Because I think there's a decent chance that the Falcons may take I think there's a more than a decent, I think it's almost a certainty that you're going to see the Falcons draft a quarterback at some point this April. And I think there's a better than average chance that one of those quarterbacks won't be in the first round, but maybe on day 2 or day 3 of this upcoming draft. And there's plenty of guys down here in Mobile that, have that day 2, day 3 pedigree, maybe even a couple of guys that may sneak into the first round. And we'll talk about those guys to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons and whether or not those guys are potentially future Falcons coached by TJ Yates. Now, passion, drive, and patience is what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors knows that everything you need, and they have everything you need to maintain your vehicle, level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, style, that sounds like the future of Falcons offense under Zac Robinson. Well, eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for with eBay's Guaranteed Fit. Your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. You can't beat a deal like that, guys, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash, baby. With all the parts you need and all the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into an MVP and bring home that win. Unlike a certain MVP over in Baltimore. Why am I taking shots at Lamar Jackson? Only because people keep taking shots at the Falcons for passing on that guy. So I'm sorry. You got to catch a stray, Lamar Jackson. But you, Lamar, can keep your ride or die alive, as well as the listeners at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. So wrapping up today's Locked On Falcons, a little shorter than usual again. We're doing podcasting after dark, but continue to make this illustrious podcast your first listen all week long, because it will be breaking down all the highs and lows of Senior Bowl practice down here in Mobile all week long. So make sure Locked On Falcons is your first listen, as well as Locked On Sports Atlanta. And so, when we talk about the Senior Bowl, I'll be watching these quarterbacks, guys. I didn't really pay that much attention to the quarterbacks in my first Senior Bowl, trip last year. Wasn't really that many good players, but they've elevated the stock. This year, there's a lot of good players at a lot of positions. The trenches is what I had my eyes on last year. I won't be, there's really good players, right? And the trenches, Latu, right? UCLA pass rusher, may be in the mix for the Falcons at 8. Ooh, guess who was his original DC when he was at Washington before he transferred to UCLA due to medical reasons? Jimmy Lake. So keep an eye on him. I know Jarvis Davis, Locked On Sports Atlanta, will be watching these trench players all week long. A couple of first rounders like Latu, probably in the mix there. So make sure you check out Locked On Sports Atlanta, as well as Locked On Falcons, to keep an eye on those guys. But because of my feeling that the Falcons are probably going to sign a veteran and draft a quarterback, I got my eyes on some of these Senior Bowl quarterbacks. And then we talked before about whether or not the Falcons can be able to trade up for one of these top underclassmen like Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, or Drake May. But see, seniors, 7 Senior Bowl quarterbacks. I got my eyes on all these guys. It's day 2, day 3 guys. Michael Penix Jr. of Washington, Bo Nix of Oregon, Spencer Rattler of South Carolina, Joe Milton, Tennessee, Sam Hartman, Notre Dame, Michael Pratt, Tulane, and Carter Bradley of South Alabama. Now, I did a write-up on these guys over at the Falcoholic, the SB Nation website for Atlanta Falcons. It's available now. I'll probably put the link in the description below. But, we'll just give you the Cliff Notes. You can go get more information by clicking on that link and checking out that article. I did a full hour-long breakdown looking at the all-22 of Michael Penix versus Michigan in the national championship game. And if you want to get access to that, all you have to do is become a Locked On Falcons insider. And you can get that for free, guys, by hitting the link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons to become a Locked On Falcons insider. I plan on breaking down many of these Senior Bowl quarterbacks, as well as Drake May, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Jordan Travis, JJ McCarthy, all these guys. So we'll probably get to like 10 or 12 quarterbacks over the course of this offseason, is the plan, as well as potentially other players at other positions that the Falcons may be targeting early in the draft, players that I like and whatnot. And all you got to do is become a Locked On Falcons insider, 14-day free trial, guys, and $4.99 a month. So you can get those breakdowns right now for free. Michael Penix available to you right now. Just hit that link in the description below. So I'm not going to go too deeply into Michael Penix because I want you to become a Locked On Falcons insider. But basically, the summary is he kind of reminds me a lot of Tua Tagovailoa as sort of a left-hander. Injury history, more of an anticipatory decision maker guy rather than a toolsy guy. I know Tua was a top 5 pick. I don't see Penix in that same way. I see him more as a day 2 pick. And I think if you were to redo that 2020 draft, you might flip Tua, who was the 5th overall pick, with Jalen Hurts, who was an early 2nd round pick, given Hurts' traits and whatnot. But as Tua has shown these last few years in Miami with Mike McDaniel and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, you put the right weapons around Michael Penix, and we saw this in Washington, where he had some really good weapons, including a guy, Rome Odunze, who may be in the mix for the Falcons' 8th overall selection. Many people think he'll be a top 10 pick in this year's draft. Penix can do some damage. So I see Penix more as a 2nd round sort of talent, but we'll see what happens after the end of this week at the Senior Bowl. Bo Nix is a guy that's been getting some first-round buzz. If you check out the NFL Network mock drafts from Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks in recent days and weeks, both had him mocked in the top 20 in the draft. That was a little bit surprising to me. I'm not as high on Bo Nix. I see him more as like a 3rd or 4th round talent. Just nothing sort of stands out to me about him. But he checks a lot of boxes. He's a solid all-around quarterback, but I don't know if he has the sort of tools and traits that maybe you're looking for as a high-end starter in the NFL that would merit a top 20 pick. But, maybe by the end of the week, I feel a lot differently about Bo Nix. Maybe I'm higher on him after seeing him live this week in Mobile. Spencer Rattler, Joe Milton, 2 other guys I'm very intrigued to see throw live just because their arms are very live. Spencer Rattler, great arm talent. Joe Milton, maybe the best arm ever, right? This man can flick it 70 yards easily, right? If you've enjoyed watching Buffalo Bills, where you see Josh Allen drop those 60-yard bombs to Gabriel Davis and Stephon Diggs these last few years, then you're going to appreciate Joe Milton. I don't know what else Joe Milton bringing to the table other than that. He's a big, strong guy, good athlete, can run, but after spending 5 years in college, he's only started 21 games, most of those coming this past year in Tennessee. And so he's a raw project that needs more reps. It's very clear that he needs that. So he's got a big arm. Intrigued to see what that looks like live, but he's going to be a project for somebody. I kind of see him more as like a 5th round sort of player going into the week. Spencer Rattler, I got a little bit higher, very live arm, very good arm talent. I see him more as a 3rd round pick. So Rattler is an intriguing player, has a very up and down college career, was the presumptive number 1 pick going into the 2021 college season as part of that 2022 draft class that featured Kenny Pickett, Desmond Ridder, Brock Purdy, among others. He was expected going into that season to be the number 1 pick. Did not go that way when he was at Oklahoma, lost his job to Caleb Williams, who is now the presumptive number 1 pick in the 2024 draft class out of USC. Rattler transferred to South Carolina. Sort of had to rebuild his career, show some maturity, show some improvement. I got to see quite a bit of Rattler last year watching Jovan Gwynn film after last year's draft. Thought he, while he has a lot of tools that are intriguing, not the greatest decision maker, especially when it comes to handling pressure and all those things. I did see growth in that area, so we'll see if we could get to see continued growth, if he can continue to rebuild his draft stock, sort of see him more as a 3rd round talent, but very toolsy, much more upside because of those traits that people were looking at him, a couple of years ago as a potential number 1 overall pick than your typical 3rd round type of prospect. Sam Hartman, to me, I get Jimmy Garoppolo vibes. I think some of that's owed to the fact that his number is number 10, but I think he's probably a little bit better athlete, better creating as a scrambler than Jimmy Garoppolo. So maybe that makes him more like Brock Purdy, right? And I think with the right players around him, as we've seen with Brock Purdy, that can be, a semi-successful. The same thing goes with Jimmy Garoppolo, a semi-successful starter in the NFL. Sort of see Sam Hart more as a backup, but, with time, with development, I think he can be that sort of guy that can be that sort of distributor and point guard in the ways when he has tools and talented players around him, like we've seen with those San Francisco 49ers quarterbacks. Michael Pratt, and then for Sam Hartman, I'd say probably like a fourth round sort of grade going into the week. Michael Pratt, probably like a sixth round grade going into the week out of Tulane. Nothing jumps out to me about Michael Pratt, but everybody who talks about him talks about the competitiveness, the toughness, the leadership, the intangibles. So we'll see, if the physical tools maybe match up to some of the mental and intangible tools, some of those tangibles. We're looking for tangibles that we can see in practice each and every day. So maybe we'll feel a little bit better. And Carter Bradley, unfortunately, his biggest claim to fame is his dad is Gus Bradley, the Colts defensive coordinator, has been around NFL locker rooms, but watching him at South Alabama this last year, I didn't see necessarily a draftable prospect. So maybe he surprises this week, but he's at the bottom of the totem pole. So in summary, I would say going into this week, I kind of see Penix as a second round pick, Rattler as a third round pick, Nix as a fourth, Hartman as a fourth, Milton as a fifth, Pratt as a sixth, and Carter Bradley as a priority free agent. But we'll see if coming out of the week, I feel higher, lower on these players, and we'll keep you guys in tune all week long here on Locked On Falcons. We'll be checking out Laiatu Latu, as well as so many of the other premium offensive tackle, pass rushers, wide receivers, Lad McConkey of Georgia, running backs, tight ends, safeties, corners, all that and more. We'll have you covered here on Locked On Falcons, Locked On Sports Atlanta, both part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today, Locked On Sports Atlanta's 24/7 YouTube streaming channels. Check out Locked On NFL to get the latest on the coaching cycles, Locked On Commanders, Locked On Seahawks, Super Bowl, Locked On Chiefs, Locked On 49ers. Well, what's next for the teams that lost the championship game, Locked On Ravens, Locked On Lions. We got you covered for whatever you want here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Check it out, your team every day.